بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونشكره على هدايته ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واذكر ربك في نفسك تضرعا وخيفة ودون الجهر من القول بالغدو والآصال ولا تكن من الغافلين. Remember your Lord with your soul humbly, in awe and as well as loud, as internally and externally, loud voices in the morning and evening, and don't be among those who are heedless. During the last few nights, we attempted to, the running theme, the central theme for our discussion was heart or soul from Islamic point of view, Quranic notion, ahadith, etc. And we outlined the two classes of heart that Quran talks about, the al-Qalb al-Saleem and al-Qalb al-Marid, which is diseased heart as well as a pure heart. During the last few nights, we discussed characteristics or features of the Qalb al-Marid. What are the unique characteristics of or features of a diseased heart? And then we outlined a few steps if we intend to move from Qalb al-Marid forward and transform and revive our hearts. Tonight, inshallah, and possibly tomorrow night, I want to focus on now the other side, the opposite side of this continuum, which is al-Qalb al-Saleem, the pure heart. Pure heart, until we get to the discussion, inshallah, possibly tomorrow night, in a nutshell, is a heart which is free from all impurities, whether they are vices, shirk, khafi and zahir, or hatred, greed, envy, arrogance, and any other spiritual impurities. We have to clean the heart. The heart that has any of these characteristics in it, from Quranic point of view, is not considered to be a pure heart. Once we remove these impurities and the heart becomes devoid of any sins and vices and so on, comes the time we fill it up with positive characteristics and features, such as love of Allah, humility, etc., etc. So in a nutshell, but according to our literature, this heart that we call it al-Qalb al-Saleem has certain features, and we're going to go through at least one or two of them tonight. Number one, the most critical characteristics of Qalb al-Saleem is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an active consciousness of the presence of Allah in our life, in which not an instant happens that God is not present. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi there is a hadith from him, crudely translated: I didn't look at anything that I didn't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before it, after it, and with it. When you get to the stage when the remembrance of Allah is all the time, engagement with Allah is all the time, all of your deed, anything that you do, it becomes ibadah. Remember the verse in the Holy Quran regarding giving of the ring during ruku'? Amir al-Mu'mineen gave it to the faqir, to the person that came. And there is a huge debate. They say, well, there are stories about the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen that during his prayer, they removed the shrapnel of some kind of an arrow in his leg and he didn't feel it. How did he feel the presence of the faqir and the poor and the needy? What they miss is that Amir al-Mu'mineen Salatullah Salam alayhi is constantly engaged with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from prayer, from one kind of prayer, one kind of remembrance, you transition to another kind of remembrance. It's not that remembrance giving to the poor is not that different from worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when your heart is engaged. When your heart is separated, then they become two different characteristics, two different features. Remembrance of Allah and non-remembrance of Allah. And when Allah is not there, then you might do certain things that are not considered to be part of ibadah. So constant contact of the heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. Al-Imran. When you get to that stage, no matter what state of mind you are in, what position you are in, you are constantly in touch with Allah. That's why in Khutbah Sha'baniyah, the Holy Prophet says, نَوْمُكُمْ فِيهِ عِبَادَةٌ. Even your sleep becomes a kind of worship. If you really work hard and you connect the heart with the base of sacredness, then everything that you do, you sleep. Amir al-Mu'mineen has another hadith that criticizes those that go through the month of Ramadan and they benefit nothing beyond abstention from food and drink. And then at the end of it, it says, God granted those who are their hearts are connected to Allah, their sleep when they are sleeping. Why? Because during their sleep, even if they are asleep, because of that presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sleep becomes ibadah. And it's a way of connection. Who are actively conscious of Allah, and no matter in what state they are in, whether they are standing, they are sitting, lying down upon their side, but they reflect on the creation and on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. Then they ask, oh Lord, you haven't created this world playfully. So they are constantly aware of it. There are a few things which I want to mention. There is a hadith from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullah salam alayhi. He defines dhikr that we are talking about here and remembrance of Allah. He says, ليس الذكر بكثرة سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر بل ذكر الله عند الحرام والحلال. Dhikr, what we're talking about here, is not just purely a dhikr of going tasbih in your hand and say subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha, although it is part of it. But if the remembrance of Allah at the threshold between haram and halal and being able to control yourself when you are at that particular, what we call temptation. If you can hold yourself back and say, no, I'm not going to submit. I will take full control of my nafs al-ammara that we have talked about in the past. So, dhikr, ليس الذكر بكثرة سبحان الله والحمد لله بل ذكر الله عند الحرام والحلال. If you remember Allah when you are tempted, when something comes up, a businessman, suddenly some kind of a deal comes up that there is halal in it and there is haram in it, but there is huge amount of profit. Stands and says, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want me to do this. And there is another hadith from Ahlul Bayt that they says that taqwa is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't see you, when Allah doesn't want to see you, where doesn't want to see you, and sees you where Allah wants to see you. So you are absent from haram, but you are present with halal. You stay away from places, thoughts, behavior, and action that Allah doesn't want you to be there. But then you are in a place where Allah wants you to be. Allah doesn't want you to be, say, in some kind of entertainment during the month of Ramadan, but Allah wants you to be during the month of Ramadan in mosques and religious centers and otherwise. Allah doesn't want you to sit in front of TV during the month of Ramadan and waste your time. Allah wants you to use this time positively and reflectively so that you benefit from it. الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم. No matter what state of mind, what condition they are in, they are actively conscious of the presence of Allah in their life. In our case, when we wake up in the morning, we have to think, it's a new day, a new opportunity. What should I do during today's this short life where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with it? Constantly working consciously for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So active consciousness will have certain consequences. When you are constantly in touch with Allah, there are some consequences that you will call it suffer or you'll see in your life. Number one, ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. Once you do remember Allah, you're constantly in touch with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the heart becomes assured and confident. This issue of feeling confident and assured and feeling certain of your life is a consequence of the dhikr in the true sense. Not just subhanallah walhamdulillah 2,000 times while your heart is not there. Imam Sajjad in Munajat al-Dhakirin echoes this concept of assurement of the heart, and it says, Ilahi bika hamat al-qulub al-waliha. O Lord, lost hearts have longed for your presence. وعلى معرفتك جمعت العقول المتباينة. And desperate intellects are brought together by knowing your presence. فلا تطمئن القلوب إلا بذكرك. Heart will not be stabilized and settled unless remember you. But dhikr in the proper sense. Hearts find no serenity except in remembering you, and souls find no rest except in seeing you. And وَلَا تَسْكُنُ النُّفُوسِ إِلَّا عِنْدَ رُؤْيَاكَ. That echoes the characteristics of what we call the stable al-Qalb al-Saleem, the stable heart. يَا مَنْ ذِكْرُهُ شَرَفٌ لِلذَّاكِرِينَ. O Lord, it is an honor to remember you. Your remembering you is an honor for those who do remember you. And another characteristics of the Qalb al-Saleem is a unique condition that Urafa, mystics and scholars have talked about, that a person reaches a state of what we call khawf and raja, lives in this continuum between fearfulness of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being hopeful. When I say fearful of God, not fearful of Allah, fearful of what happens to me on the day of judgment with little bit of action that I have done during my life. with little bit of deeds that are presented. Quran says, and this, by the way, is a clear something that we constantly have talked about in wayfaring, sayr and suluk. If you want to move forward stage by stage, finally you reach a stage of khawf and raja. That on the one hand, you look at yourself and you say, okay, what have I done during my time? If I look during munajat sha'baniyah, dua iftitah, dua kumail, and few other munajat, we see constantly Ahlul Bayt reminding us, or the language that they use, the narrative that they use, clearly indicates I look at my own deed and I become despondent, fearful of the hereafter. Yet, I look at you and your karam and your generosity and your compassion, I become hopeful. This khawf and raja is one of those characteristics of the heart which has been stabilized. من قلة الزاد وبعد السفر أمير المؤمنين. That I have very little to offer, and for the long journey that is in front of us. If Ahlul Bayt say this, what chance do we have? So this khawf and raja, when people always fearful of the day of judgment and return before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these people are afraid that they didn't do enough. Not fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For ordinary people that don't understand the concept of Tawheed and the concept of the characteristics of Allah, they are fearful of Allah, that Allah is going to punish them. That's not the case. People who have a stable heart, they are fearful because they haven't done enough in preparation for the hereafter. Look at dua Abu Hamza Thumali and others. Oh Lord, should I not cry for the fact that soon I will have to depart and they will put me in that grave, and I have not prepared the grave for this journey that I'm going to go. So khawf is because qillatul zad. We haven't got enough in preparation for the future. There is a verse, واذكر ربك في نفسك تضرعا وخيفة ودون الجهل من القول. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us that you need to remember this active remembrance. تضرعا وخيفة. On the one hand, you are fearful, and on the other hand, you are hopeful. In our life, we come across individuals that as soon they commit all kinds of sins, all kinds. They violate not a single command that they don't violate it. And when you remind them, the only verse from the Holy Quran that they remember and they throw it out, Inna Allah ghafurun rahim. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to forget and is merciful. What about the other verses in the Holy Quran that says, Inna Allah shadidul iqab, is going to punish? No, for them, Inna Allah ghafurun rahim is enough. The concept, this is where we need to focus on the balance between khawf and raja. While Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to become despondent with the khawf to the degree that it paralyzes us. I have sinned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to forgive my sin, I might as well go and do whatever I want. Or on the other side, raja, that God is going to forgive everything even if I don't do anything. That's the balance. We need to balance. Maqam al-khawf wal-raja is a significant state in which it has two components. Khawf, which is the fear for the shortcomings that we have, and that prevents us from committing sin, as well as raja, which removes the despondency and tells us, no, don't give up. You can go forward. Look again in Dua Kumail, Munajat Sha'baniyya, Abu Hamza Thumali, constantly Ahlul Bayt, they talk about this fact that, oh Lord, when I look at my deed, I feel despondent. Then I think about your generosity and your forgiveness, I become hopeful. This living between hope and fear is critical. So stay away from those. When not enough, there are a group of people, they don't do enough, whether they are financially, socially, worship-wise, and constantly hope that Allah is going to reward them because Allah is merciful. While Quran says, don't give up, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله, don't become despondent of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, inna Allah ghafurun rahim, but at the same time, you have to be mindful that you need to be actively searching and seeking that mercy of Allah. Again, we go back to the Quran. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. You are hopeful. But unfortunately, if you don't do enough, then you will not be able to get anything. This hope has to be accompanied with action. The height of raja is man taba wa amana wa amila salihan فَأُولَٰئِكَ يُبَدِّلُ اللَّهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ حَسَنَاتٍ. If you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take your sayyat, sins, and turn them into hasanat, Quran says, Tawbah awwal, wa amana, faith, wa amila salihan. All of these have to go together. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Then goes for tawasaw bil-haqqi wa tawasaw bis-sabr. So if we want فَلْيَعْمَلَ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. So what we have is raja, hopefulness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to forgive, has to be with the strong action from our part. Remember a few nights ago when somebody called Sayyid ibn Tawus, the story of Sayyid ibn Tawus, that somebody went to him and said that you say that during the month of Ramadan, shaitan has been chained. We don't see any differences during the month of Ramadan with the chaining of shaitan or not. We're still being tempted, we're still being misguided, etc., etc. The problem with this kind of conception is that they think all the sins are due to shaitan. If you chain the shaitan, then I have to become pure. What they don't understand is that I'm still paying back for the year of sinfulness, for the rust on my heart, and nafs al-ammara that I have. If I haven't tamed any of this, if I don't do anything constructively, I shouldn't expect much to happen during the month of Ramadan. Ibn Jandab goes to Imam Sadiq salawatullah salam alayhi and asks question. Ya Ibn Rasulullah, on the day of judgment, who are the ones that are going to be secured and pass? Imam says, يَحْلَكُ الْمُتَّكِلُ عَلَىٰ عَمَلِهِ. Those who think that they have done enough during their life to pass the bridge, these are the ones that will fall. But those that live between khawf and raja, on the one hand, they are fearful of the fact that they haven't done enough, and on the other hand, they are hopeful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to grant them. There's something similar to this from Imam Zain al-Abidin that says, if you pray to Allah, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to deal with you with justice, but deal with you with compassion. Why? Because if absolute justice becomes the criteria for who goes forward and who's not, none of us, apart from Ma'sumin, the infallibles, can have anything to stand on. There are stories of our ulama, Marhum Majlisi. This is narrated from one of his students, Said Ni'matullah Jazairi. They say he was a student of Marhum Majlisi. They said when he died, I stayed on his grave till the morning, reciting Quran. Close to Adhan al-Subh, I fell asleep. And I saw Marhum Majlisi in my dream. So I said, teacher, professor, tell me what happened over there. He shook his head and said, extremely difficult. These are Marhum Majlisi's grand scholars and everything else. They put question mark on all of my deed, all the publications and everything else, that it was not done purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was a degree of shirk khafi was in it. They let me go for one action. So one day I had to grapple with the fiqh question in my mind, and I couldn't resolve it in the house. So I decided to come out of my house and walk in the souk and the market of Isfahan during that time. Everything is closed during the afternoon. So as I was thinking and pondering about various possibilities about this theological question, I heard a cry of a woman. I turned around, I saw a servant of somebody sitting in the corner and crying, weeping. So I went to her, I said, Sister Amatullah, what's going on? She said, Sheikh, I am serving the wife of a rich family. The wife gave me a little bit of money to go and buy a piece of cloth for her, and I have lost that money. I remember that somebody brought a cloth from, I don't know, India or somewhere else for me, and I have absent-mindedly put it some corner. I said, wait here. I went home and I took that cloth out and came to her and I said, take this and go to this lady of the house and say, this is the only qumash I found in the market. They let me go for this. Why? Because there was nobody else around. It was you, the lady, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can we really put our hands on our hearts and say that none of our deeds, there is no shirk of khafir or something in it? Riyah, ostentation. You see, when group of people are sitting there, you become generous by spending money so that they all praise, hey, this is the most rich and the most affluent and as a generous individual. But quietly go to this person and say, look, there is a family over there that needs help. There is no image. The story of Bohlul and a rich Iranian person that built a mosque. Build a mosque and put a note outside the mosque. This is the mosque of Hajj Fulan. Bohlul at night came and removed the plaque and put his name on it. He said, this is Mosque of Bohlul. Tomorrow, the Hajj came and suddenly realized his name was not there anymore. Who's done it, Bohlul? Bring him in. They brought Bohlul in. He asked them, should ask ourselves, did you, when you build the mosque, did you build it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or for the sake of riyah and showing off? If you did it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah knows who did it, whether it's my name on it or somebody else's name. If you did it for the sake of showing off and riyah, there is not an iota of worth in this building. It's worth nothing. In our behavior, in our prayers, in our behavior, and whatever we do, if we do it for the sake of showing off, becomes riyah, shirk khafi, or even shirk al-dhahir, then the day of judgment we have no hope. That's why Imam Sajjad says, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to deal with you with compassion, not absolute justice. Absolute justice, only Ahlul Bayt have the capability to pass through. If Allah wants to split hair and say, look, this action is not correct. The thought wasn't behind it. Your heart wasn't in it. You did it for riyah. You did it for ostentation. You did it to show off. Khawf and Raja is a unique characteristic of people who have a stable heart that confine them within constant movement of back and forth. On the one hand, they look at themselves and their own deeds and they say, oh Lord, help, because I haven't done enough. And on the other hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ. That means they have raja, hope, that on the day of judgment, they have to be more active. Inshallah, we will continue with this tomorrow night and probably wrap it up. Luqman, just finished with this story. Luqman gave advice to his son. He said, oh son, if you come on the day of judgment and you have the entire good deed of the world and before you, don't become arrogant, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might find something in it that you fall. And if you come with huge amount of sin on your back, don't give up hope, because Allah, from Allah's compassion and mercy, will find something to grant you and forgive you. So we have to, during this month, we have to constantly live between these two poles. On the one hand, be mindful of the fact that our deeds are not enough, and on the other hand, be hopeful that Allah is not going, the most compassionate, the most merciful, is not going to abandon us. Inshallah. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَّسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. O Lord, don't punish us